Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here live at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, as we are every Wednesday on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. I am coming to you live today, I guess technically from Benton Harbor, Michigan, just outside of St. Joseph, Michigan, where I'm spending the week for a little time out on the lake and on the water. I'm enjoying the time here, but still wanted to bring you a live episode this week because we have a Kentucky basketball schedule to react to. There are still a few dates for Southeastern Conference play to work out, like whether you play on Tuesday or Wednesday during the week, that sort of thing. But for all intents and purposes, we have the final Kentucky basketball schedule for the 2025-2026 season, which includes a full non-conference slate, obviously the couple exhibition games, which we will spend some time talking about because they're more interesting than your average exhibition games this season, and then an 18-game Southeastern Conference schedule. I believe it was Monday where we kind of got the final meat of the schedule for the Cats, and that was with the announcement of the, what is it technically called, the BBN United Tip-Off Classic presented by Kentucky Tourism, which brings you exciting matchups against the likes of Nichols, Eastern Illinois, and Valparaiso. If those of you who maybe haven't seen yet, BBN United is the new I'm not the person probably to say exactly what it is, but it's the new way that you can help raise some funds and help the collective that isn't really a collective. It's kind of, I think, more revenue share than it is collective. But you can help get some money to our favorite players at Kentucky, which is always a good thing. So please, consider helping out BBN United if you do feel so inclined. But I think the best way to go about this, we will talk obviously some more about some matchups than others, and we'll talk kind of some big picture stuff as we go through, maybe even dive in to some predictions. But I guess first and foremost, please make sure you are subscribed to us here on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. We have episodes on Mondays and Fridays, and this live episode on Wednesday afternoons. If you're watching on Twitter, please make sure you are following me at BRamseyKSR, same on TikTok as well, where I post some clips from this show and some other videos that I do put out. Leave the video a like if you're watching on YouTube as well. And as always, please feel free to jump into the discussion live. I will get back to your comments throughout the show. If you have your own predictions about this coming 2025-2026 Kentucky basketball season, I'd love to hear the game that you're most looking forward to on the schedule. You can drop that in the comments and we will go back and forth throughout today's show. But I think you do have to start with maybe one of the most anticipated exhibition games in the country, and certainly one of the most anticipated Kentucky exhibition games probably that I can think of during my time following the team. That's on Friday, October 24th. That's the same weekend that Kentucky plays Tennessee in football, so a big one for Big Blue Nation. But Kentucky will host Purdue, likely the preseason number one team. Braden Smith, certainly the likely preseason National Player of the Year in college basketball. So that's going to be a ton of fun to watch the Wildcats take on the Boilermakers in late October. A very good barometer right off the bat to see exactly what this Kentucky team could be. Now, am I going to put much stock into an exhibition game that takes place in October? No, I'm not. Obviously, it's going to be our job here on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show, and certainly the job of other pundits nationally, to overreact to whatever that result may be, and that's all fine and well. But I don't think that winning by 20 or losing by 20 in that game necessarily means a ton. But it will be really interesting to see, hey, like, how does Jalen Lowe match up with, like I said, probably the likely National Player of the Year in Braden Smith? Purdue has Trey Kaufman-Renn, another very veteran guy who's been an all Big Ten type of contributor. Can Kentucky's front court contain a guy like that? They also have some other big guys coming in that will make a big difference for the Boilermakers. And you get a chance. Kentucky's probably going to be a top 10 to 12 team in the preseason in most rankings. Purdue's absolutely going to be a top 3 team in probably all of the rankings. So you're going to get a chance to see how those teams match up with each other in late October. And then Kentucky's going to turn around and play Georgetown, obviously another high major team with some expectations coming into the 2025-2026 season. So two big exhibition opponents coming into Rupp Arena this year. It's very different than the times where you're going to play, Kentucky Wesleyan or Georgetown, the NAIA team in Kentucky, or Transylvania, or some teams like that. You have quality high major basketball teams coming to Rupp Arena. So it'll be a lot of fun to get early preseason looks at what this Kentucky team will be. And I do think that it helps you as a coach and as a team really come together to set the expectations for the season, where you're not going to be necessarily knocked on your heels that first big game at Louisville on November 11th, or when you have to go play Michigan State in Madison Square Garden, or some of these other really big games that we're going to talk about as we go through today's show. You will have already had some people that look like you and play like you and are as athletic and strong as you. You will have already gone against them wearing another jersey in these exhibition games, and I think that will prove to be very valuable this season. Alex Fraley in the chat says, I think the most underrated game is the Gonzaga game in Nashville. I think it's being outshined by St. John's and other non-con games. Was the second best game last season behind Florida, in my opinion. Certainly, when you look back to last season, that Kentucky Gonzaga game was a very memorable one. Not just because of the way that Kentucky came back from a big deficit in the second half and overtime, but obviously it was a win that I think solidified what Kentucky did against Duke to begin the year. And it was like, hey, this Kentucky team is here to stay among the nation's best. Going into this year, I think we have those expectations already set in the preseason. So maybe it's not going to mean as much on that level. But I do think that once again, it's a massive game. It's going to be, certainly with it being played in Nashville. Last year we went up to Seattle. There's going to be a bunch of Big Blue Nation fans there in Nashville taking over, just as we do for the SEC tournament. So probably certainly a more pro Cats crowd this time around. But it's going to be in a stretch of some very tough games for Kentucky in early December heading into SEC play. We will talk a little bit more about that one here in just a little bit. But Kentucky's first two quote-unquote real games of the season will be a part of that BBN United Tip-Off Classic that I mentioned, playing Nichols on November 4th and then Valparaiso on November 7th. Obviously, two teams that Kentucky should have no issue with, some kind of good tune-up games coming off of what could be difficult exhibition games, as I mentioned. I think it'll be good to kind of then be able to have a reset and then have some probably feel-good type of games where even if you don't execute perfectly, even if you're still knocking off some rust or whatever it may be, you should be able to get some relatively smooth victories heading into your first huge test, which will be November 11th at the Yum Center against Louisville. This will be, potentially a top 10 type of matchup early in the season. The Cardinals certainly have a ton of preseason expectations, just as we have in Lexington, year two of Coach Pope, year two of Coach Kelsey. Kentucky obviously got the better of this matchup in Lexington last season, but it's a whole different beast when you have to go on the road and play the Cardinals. I still think that the pieces fit together a little bit more for Kentucky this year. But we saw what Mikael Brown did with USA Basketball and the U19 team there. He's going to be one of the best freshmen in all of college basketball this season. And I think he's going to have a real chance to be certainly an all-ACC type of player, but potentially even an All-American. This year's one of the best freshmen in college basketball. So it'll be interesting to see the matchup with him and Jalen Lowe and the rest of the Cats backcourt, if he's sort of enough firepower for Louisville to keep up with this Kentucky team. Then you go back to the BBN United Tip-Off Classic with Eastern Illinois. Should be, hopefully it's not a bounce back sort of game from Louisville, but hopefully, you're picking up another easy victory there heading to Madison Square Garden to play Michigan State in the Champions Classic this year on November 18th. I said this recently on Twitter at BRamseyKSR about how I think Michigan State's one of the more underrated teams going into this season. I know they lost a decent amount with Chase Richardson going one and done to the NBA draft. Xavier Booker transferred to UCLA, missing some other pieces as well. But I think what they bring back from a defensive and rebounding standpoint, especially, will be able to carry this Spartans team. I like what they still have it all out on the perimeter there as well. And then obviously you still have Coach Izzo on the sideline. So yet another early season test for Kentucky. We'll talk about this kind of more in the aggregate here in just a second. You have Loyola, Maryland coming to town, Tennessee Tech coming to town to round out November before you head until you play North Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge in Lexington, and then just a few days later, you turn around and head to Nashville to play Gonzaga. So to me, if you're looking at those early December, that stretch from mid-November to early December where you're at Louisville, Michigan State at Madison Square Garden, North Carolina at Rupp, then Gonzaga in Nashville. Like, what are the realistic expectations to come out of those 4 games from a win-loss record perspective? I think that probably Louisville's the best team on paper of that group, and then Gonzaga and Michigan State probably are there. North Carolina certainly has some questions going into this year, but you have guys like Caleb Wilson. Hubert Davis has, he's probably on the hot seat this year and really is going to be motivated as ever to win at a high level. None of those games are going to be easy. You get one of them true road, one of them true home, and then a couple neutral site games, which I think is kind of a perfect setup for the Cats. I think that with what you expect this Kentucky team to be, I think that quote unquote just going 2-2 in those 4 games would be disappointing. I think that you would want to go 3-1 to feel really good about the Cats coming out of those 4 games. If you go 4-0, then at that point you're probably A, undefeated, and B, probably number 1 in the country. I don't necessarily care about going 4-0, other than it does probably mean that the most likely loss is the one at Louisville, which I know would upset a lot of Big Blue Nation. But I think if Kentucky can go 3-1 through those 4 games, you feel pretty darn good about where you're at as a team, with a couple more big games coming right up. You play North Carolina Central, and then on Saturday, December 13th, you play Indiana for the return of that series at Rupp Arena, and then you go down to Atlanta and play St. John's on Saturday, December 20th. The reason I separate these 2 games is because even with Louisville, and that was just earlier in the season, so I talked about it separately, like the emotions of these 2 games are going to be different than a lot of the games, even going into SEC play this season. With Indiana, it's the return of a historic rivalry, and one where we honestly are left. I know it ended up winning in the NCAA tournament, but you're kind of left with a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth because of the Watford shot at Assembly Hall back in 2012, I guess that would have been. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that feel different ways about this game. There's going to be some people that talk about Indiana being irrelevant. That's not going to be me. I'm a Hoosier, and I'm born and raised, even though I've been a Kentucky fan my whole life. I think it's great that this has returned. Indiana, regardless of what they've been recently, is certainly one of the premier programs in all of college basketball. It's good that Kentucky and Indiana are playing each other. These are 2 states where basketball probably means more culturally in these 2 states than it means anywhere else in the country. So it is good that these 2 programs are back playing. I think that Indiana is going to be vastly improved this year. I think their skill level is going to be much higher than it has been in the last few years. They're going to be able to shoot the ball. Lamar Wilkerson gives them a potential star this year, and they have a ton of transfer pieces, including Tucker DeVries, who's going to have a chance to be one of the best players in the Big Ten from day one. They went down to Puerto Rico and went 3-0 on a trip down there. It was certainly a weird trip. 2 of those 3 games they trailed by 20-plus points at halftime, but nonetheless, they did go 3-0 against a pretty darn strong competition. So that's not going to be a cakewalk in Rupp Arena, but it'll be a little bit more friendly atmosphere, certainly, than when Kentucky last played at Assembly Hall. And then you have Coach Mark Pope against Coach Rick Pitino in Atlanta, the game that kind of everybody has wanted. Then, especially once Coach Pitino came back to Big Blue Madness and got his moment in front of BBN on December 20th, that game is going to have a ton of emotion. It's going to have a ton of emotion for Coach Mark Pope, probably above all else, and then certainly the fan base and a ton of emotion for Coach Pitino. It's something that you can't really understand unless you played sports at a relatively high level or coached it at a relatively high level. If you understand what it means to play against your former coach, or as a coach to coach against one of your former players, it's really something that can't be replicated in quote unquote normal life. And I think that that's going to heighten everything for everybody in that game. You can't help but kind of feel it and feed off of it when you're inside of that locker room. So I think just in those two games, again, if you can go 3-1 in that Louisville, North Carolina, Gonzaga, Michigan State stretch, I think if you can then split these two and finish up 4-2 in those 6 really, really big non-conference games, you're going to feel great because your 2 losses are probably going to be to top 25 teams, and at least 3 or 4 of those 4 wins are going to be against top 25 teams. So you're going to feel pretty darn good from a resume standpoint at that time. And then you finish off just before Christmas playing Bellarmine in Lexington to finish off the non-conference slate. To me, as a whole, I've already kind of outlined some goals in there of going 4-2 in those big games, and then obviously you run the table in the bye matchups. I think it's an incredibly difficult non-conference schedule. Playing 6 potential top 25 teams when you have the gauntlet that has become the Southeastern Conference schedule, I think is certainly more than enough competition. I know that fans will really appreciate this season, probably the mix of where those games are. You get 2 of those big games at Rep Arena, plus 1 in Nashville and 1 in Louisville. So it is, I guess, if money is no object, it's very possible for a lot of Kentucky fans to hit 4 of those 6 big time non-conference games, especially with, again, even one of them that I didn't mention being in Atlanta, and then potentially a trip to New York for people that like to make that trip. So it's very feasible to really hit all of these big time non-conference games for Kentucky fans before you get into the conference slate and you hit the ground running with a trip to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama. But I think too, one of the things that makes the non-conference schedule tough is just that the schedule of some of these games, playing North Carolina in Gonzaga on December 2nd and 5th. There's such a quick turnaround between those games, but I like it because that's what life in the SEC is now, where you have to play those Tuesday, Saturday, or Wednesday, Saturday quick turnarounds against potential top 10, top 15, top 25 teams. I like that you get a glimpse of that in the non-conference schedule, and then you have just 1 week in between games with Louisville and Michigan State, and a game sandwiched even in between there, and then your games between IU and St. John's as well. So I really think, for all intents and purposes, this is almost a perfect setup for your non-conference schedule if you are Kentucky. And then it's kind of talking big picture about the conference schedules. Again, you still have some dates that need to get ironed out there, but the SEC is not going to be as good as it was last season. That's, first of all, almost impossible. It was one of the best conferences we've seen in a long time. Last year, I think that just the top end talent level will be down just a bit, but it's going to be equally deep. I think you're talking certainly double figure NCAA tournament teams from this field this year. You're talking 8 to 10 top 25 teams at a lot of times. And Kentucky has, let's see, the teams are going to play twice this year. You only have 1 game against Arkansas. You have to go to Bud Walton Arena to play Coach Calipari, but you get 2 games against Florida as usual. You get 2 games against Tennessee as usual, and then I believe Vanderbilt as well as a double dip. Yes, double dip against Vanderbilt. But you have to go to Auburn. You have to go to Alabama. You have to go to Arkansas. So that is a pretty tough draw for Kentucky in terms of single trips to really, really good teams this year within conference play. I think that if Kentucky is going to be a top 10 type team, if Kentucky's going to compete for a Final Four this season, I think that you're looking, you want to go 13-5, 12-6 in the SEC this year. I think probably 14-4 wins it. I think that trying to predict going anything better than 14-4 with as good as the Southeastern Conference has become is kind of a fool's errand. I just don't think it's fair to probably expect more than 14 wins for any given team with how tough this league is. But I think anything 12-6 or better is a very solid, strong showing in the Southeastern Conference. You add that with just a couple non-conference losses, and I think you're talking about being on that 1, 2, 3 seed line, right where you want to be as a Kentucky fan going into March with a real chance to advance to the Final Four. Because I think that's really what this team's goals can and should be this year is thinking about playing in a Final Four. There you have it for just kind of a quick overview of the schedule. Now that it is out, I did want to unpack some of those non-conference matchups a little bit more and just what kind of going through that grind will be in the non-conference schedule, especially. And I'm sure we'll dive into more of this as the season gets even closer. But thank you all for tuning in to today's live episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Again, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel here, the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on YouTube. Leave this video a like if you're watching this sometime in the future. Still feel free to drop a comment. I'll get back to you. Make sure you are following on Twitter and TikTok at BRamseyKSR as well. Hope everybody has a great day, and we will be back, if not Friday, on Monday with a little film breakdown, which I know everybody enjoys, so we'll dive into that here soon as well. But thank you again for watching, and have a great rest of your week.